Just how much improved can this LSU defense be? And how much improved will this LSU defense be?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also check us out on YouTube as well. So watch the podcast in addition to listening to the podcast. But wherever you listen, however you listen, and however you interact with the podcast, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all of that great stuff. Just always appreciate you for making us your first listen every single day. All right, it is a Mailbag Wednesday, so I want to get into some of the best questions that were sent in this past week. Starting off with the question, how much better can this LSU defense be this season versus the absolute disaster of what last season was? We'll get into that, but first, I got to tell y'all that today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Before we get into your questions as well, I want to remind everybody that I'll do a Mailbag Wednesday every week. I try to do it every week. Hold me accountable to that. But you can send your questions in on Twitter. My handle is below if you're watching us on YouTube. If not, that Twitter account is at Caroline Fenton1. Or if you're watching on the YouTube page, feel free to send your question in below in the comments, comments, concern, anything that you want me to discuss on next week's edition of Locked On LSU. But let's get into it. The first question is, how much better can and will this LSU defense be? And that's the golden question, because that is what held this team back last season. I wholeheartedly believe, and this is what tortures me of what could have been, is if LSU's defense was just average, like average, middle of the road, not great. I'm not asking you to be elite. I'm not asking you to be top 2, top 3 in the SEC, top 10 in the country. I'm just asking you to be average. With an average defense, LSU probably wins a national championship last year. And that tastes like vinegar to say. But even if it's not a national championship, I can venture to say that I believe that LSU gets to the college football playoff with an average defense. Because I think that LSU beats Ole Miss with an average defense. I think LSU probably beats Alabama and probably beats Florida State with an average defense. Truly, I wholeheartedly believe that. So how much better can the defense be? Well, you're not really asking for much if you're just asking for it to be better. Now, what I'm not going to do is say, well, it can't be worse, because I've learned that lesson the hard way. Whenever I say that, boom, just like that, it is worse. And it can be worse than what the defense was this past season. It can be. Trust me, there's some horrendous defenses out there. But it can't be at the same time. Like, is it possible? Yes. But if Brian Kelly wants to stick around at LSU, as long as I believe he wants to stick around at LSU, that LSU defense cannot be as bad as it was last year. Now, some reasons for optimism why it will be better, even inches better, even just average. I think first and foremost is you have to ask yourself the question, how much do you believe in and trust this coaching staff? Now, of course, obviously, Matt House had a solid resume. He coached in the NFL, coached at Kentucky. He had SEC experience in his first season at LSU. The defense was actually quite good. So take all of it with a grain of salt, but we're talking about some of the most respected coaches in their craft, all at LSU, with a proven track record, both at LSU and not at LSU. Bo Davis is one of the most well-respected, if not the most well-respected defensive line coach in all of college football. The only defensive line coach in college football that I think you could argue is better or even more well-respected is Kevin Peoples. And oh yeah, by the way, he's on your coaching staff as well. He's the one who's going to be coaching up the edge rushers. So as far as the edge rushers are concerned, I feel optimistic that that unit is going to be better. Now, as far as the defensive line is concerned, they need D tackles. Like, they need D tackle depth. They need D tackle starters. And I wholeheartedly believe and expect LSU to address that position in the spring transfer portal. How much quality are you going to find in the spring transfer portal window? That is the real question. Are you going to get bona fide elite SEC starters in the spring transfer portal window? I mean, I'm not saying there's not a chance, but I am saying that the chance is not very high. Can you at least get people in the building to provide depth and get coached up by two of the best defensive line coaches in all of college football? Now we're talking. Now we're talking about what's going to be a little bit more realistic. I don't expect the defensive line to be a force multiplier. I really don't, just because you don't have the talent and you don't have the depth. But I think the most glaring issue with LSU's defense last season, it wasn't the D-line, although I do think that there was a lot of meat left on the bone, a lot of potential that was yet to be realized because the coaching staff didn't utilize the defensive line and the edge rushers and just overall your pressure up front correctly. But it was the secondary that was the most glaring issue. And I think that was a talent deficiency issue. And I do think that was a coaching issue. I talked about this on yesterday's podcast when we're kind of breaking down some of Blake Baker's comments that he made in his press conference last week. And he talked about how we're going to put these guys in their most natural positions. We are going to put these guys in positions where they can succeed, which sounds incredibly obvious, doesn't it? At least it should. But that's not what Matt House did last season. Because Sage Ryan, whose best and most natural position is at safety, he was playing corner last year. That's partly because you didn't have any corners and you just needed to make do with what you had. But I also think it was just poor coaching. So if now you feel like you have enough depth and experience at the cornerback position, then that allows Sage Ryan to play a role that more naturally fits him. And then you also add a few pieces in the transfer portal, experienced pieces in the transfer portal in the secondary. Jordan Gilbert, a transfer from Texas A&M. You're talking about a safety that has real SEC West experience at a big-time program. And no disrespect whatsoever to Zy Alexander, because I thought he played some pretty good football for you last season. But Zy Alexander transferred from Southeastern. Deuce Chestnut transferred from Syracuse. It's not really the same. And also, let's look at the transfer portal class last season. You got nothing from Denver Harris. I expect Jordan Gilbert to pay more dividends as your Texas A&M transfer than Denver Harris. Deuce Chestnut couldn't do anything for you because they couldn't be on the field. So I think that the depth that you added in the transfer portal, and also Ashton Stamps and Javian Toviano, taking that next step forward in year 2, it's at least going to provide you more depth. Now, I'm still skeptical about a couple of things. One, I'm skeptical about Corey Raymond's coaching ability in the secondary. And you're probably thinking, what in the world is your problem? Corey Raymond gave LSU the moniker of DBU. And I understand that. But ever since that 2019 national championship season, 2020 at LSU, 2021 at LSU, and then the last 2 years, 22 and 23 at Florida, frankly, LSU secondaries haven't just been not good. They've been bad. Like, bad. Lose you games bad. So I think Corey Raymond is an expert recruiter, but I still need to see Corey Raymond coach up a really good secondary in the last, 4 or 5 years. The second thing that I'm skeptical about is the usage of Harold Perkins, and I will remain skeptical until we can actually see Harold Perkins playing inside linebacker against USC and moving forward. I will always remain skeptical about that decision. That's something I broke down on yesterday's podcast, which you can find on your preferred podcast platform and on YouTube. But all of that to say, a long way of saying, I think that this LSU defense can be much improved. Mostly because I think the coaching staff is much improved. Blake Baker, he proved that he could do it at Missouri. He turned one of the worst defenses in all of college football into a top 25 defense. Kevin Peoples turned that defensive line at LSU and at Mizzou and the edge rushers at Mizzou into a top 15, top 20 unit. Bo Davis what he was able to accomplish at Texas. The defensive line was probably one of the top force multipliers in college football. Now, again, what can Bo Davis do with lesser talent and lesser size? Now, that's what we're going to see, because that's probably what he's going to be working with this upcoming season at LSU. Because I don't think a Devondre Sweat is walking through the door anytime soon. But I think that this LSU defense already is better because of the coaching staff. Now, come September, we'll see. But right now, as of April 10th, I feel encouraged that it will be improved, and encouraged that it's not giving up 700 plus yards to Ole Miss on any given night. We're going to continue with your mailbag questions coming up next. And coming up next, let's switch to the offensive side. Your questions on the quarterback position. We'll get into that coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL, and baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You can bet on everything. You've got slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all that great stuff, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So only a couple of weeks left in the NHL regular season. If you're looking to get in on the action before the regular season winds up and we get into the Stanley Cup playoffs, look at placing some money on the Pittsburgh Penguins. At the trade deadline in mid-March, it looked like Pittsburgh was really struggling, but now they continue to scratch and claw their way back into a playoff position. They have been red hot. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. Again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon and make that first bet an automatic win. FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we're part of the Locked On Network, your team every single day. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? You have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. You're not alone. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Rolling along with some of your questions on this Mailbag Wednesday. The next question, I think, comes from a place of anxiety, of newness, and moving on to what's next. And this question is, what happens if Garrett Nussmeier can't make that adjustment to the starting quarterback position? Now, the reason why I chose this is because I think that this Locked On LSU fan and LSU football fan that sent this in, they might not be the only one that feels this way. So let's talk about it. Let's get into a little bit of therapy, if you will. Why would you have any reason to believe that Garrett Nussmeier cannot make that jump to the starting quarterback position? Like, that is my genuine question in response to that question that was sent in. Have you been given any reason to believe that he can't? Have coaches said anything that give you reason to believe that he's not ready? Because I look at Garrett Nussmeier as a guy that's had a lot more experience than most first-year starting quarterbacks in this league. Not just in the SEC, but in college football. Like, Garrett Nussmeier has been sitting in the passenger seat for the last 3 seasons. He talked last year about how, Brian Kelly did at least, talked about how every day he would come in and prepare like the starter. We've seen Garrett Nussmeier have to come off the bench cold and step into gotta-have-it situations. I think the Missouri game is the perfect example of that. The Jaden Daniels had to leave, got to go off the field with a bruised rib. That was an incredibly back and forth game. And I forgot what the score was and like what the part of the game was in which Garrett Nussmeier had to come in. But that entire game was back and forth. Those are high stakes situations. We had to see Garrett Nussmeier come in the SEC championship game against the eventual national champion Georgia Bulldogs. And yeah, he had some gunslinger tendencies in that game, but he gave us all a lot of reason to be encouraged. Against Wisconsin, did that look like a guy who wasn't ready to be a starting quarterback? Because I think that Garrett Nussmeier has shown nothing but poise, nothing but confidence, nothing but this certain sense of not cockiness, not arrogance, but I guess confidence of this is my team and this is my job and I have a job to do and I have a team to lead and to support. So I have no reason to believe that he's not. Now, let's just live in that land of anxiety and fear and worry of, what's coming next of life without Jaden Daniels, because I get it. Whenever you go from a guy who had, 5 years of experience, starting experience in college football, won a Heisman Trophy, a guy that you were comfortable with, it's scary to leave that. It's like, it's like breaking up with your boyfriend and finding a new one. It's kind of scary. So let's say he's not. I hate to be blunt with you. What happens if Garrett Nussmeier is not ready to take on the starting quarterback role? Then you lose. Then you're not going to win very many football games. And no disrespect to AJ Swan, but I've seen AJ Swan. I've watched AJ Swan in person at Vanderbilt games. He's now starting quarterback in the SEC. He struggled at Vanderbilt. The expectations at LSU are a little bit higher than they are at Vanderbilt. I don't think that Ricky Collins is in a position to be your starting quarterback this season. I don't think that Colin Hurley is in a position to be your starting quarterback this season. So what would happen if Garrett Nussmeier is not ready for this stage? Then you're not going to be very good this year. And that's frank, and that probably isn't very comforting to hear, but that's the truth. You win and lose games in this league because of the quarterback position. And if your quarterback can't handle that, you're not going to be very good. But with that being said, I wholeheartedly believe that Brian Kelly would have gone out to get a more well-established quarterback in the transfer portal if he didn't believe wholeheartedly in Garrett Nussmeier. I'm not worried about Garrett Nussmeier. I'm not. And maybe I should. Maybe I should worry a little bit more. I'm not stepping into this season saying that Garrett Nussmeier is perfect and amazing and is never going to make a bad read and is never going to throw an interception. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that I'm not worried about him taking over this role. Who is more ready to take on a starting role? Honestly, who in college football who has never been a starting quarterback in the past is more ready to take on this role? At least, mentally, physically, emotionally ready to take on this role more than Garrett Nussmeier. So I'm not worried about Nuss. Am I worried about the defensive tackle position? Yes. Am I worried about Harold Perkins and how he adjusts to the inside linebacker position? Yes. Am I worried? Not the right word. Skeptical about the offensive coordinator position? Frankly, yes. Nuss, that's not at the top of my list. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. All right, one last question that I want to get to has to do with the women's basketball program. Not only looking back, but also looking at, not the program, this team. Not just looking back, but also looking forward. We'll continue with your questions right after this. All right, I want to tell you about Game Time. Game Time is my number one go-to place whenever I need to buy tickets. Actually, true story. I was in Atlanta this past weekend for a wedding, wanted to go to a Braves game. Where is the first place that I looked for tickets? I went to Game Time. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting the tickets faster and easier. I promise you, the process was so easy. I bought the tickets on the Game Time app, and my credit card information was already loaded in. As soon as I bought them, I got a text, and I just clicked on the link to the text, and there were my tickets. It was the easiest thing. I pulled them up. I scanned them once I got to Truist Park. Super easy, super quick. It was a great experience. Plus, prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. I got a great deal on Braves opening day tickets. And Game Time always has killer last minute deals. They've got all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guaranteed. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Plus, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. I know I sometimes get a little bit of anxiety when I buy tickets. Like, I feel like I'm just committed, but don't worry about that with Game Time. They have fantastic customer service. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thanks again for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Final question on this week's Mailbag Wednesday. A bunch of questions kind of along these same lines. But overall, the general vibe of the question is this LSU women's basketball season a disappointment based off of the talent and the expectations? My initial reaction is absolutely not. I don't understand how in year 3 with your head coach that an Elite 8 exit would be a disappointment, because were the expectations winning back-to-back national championships? I know that was the goal, but was that the expectation? If that was your expectation to win a national championship, then maybe your expectations were too high. Now, if your expectation was, well, you got to make the tournament. I mean, you have to make a run in the SEC tournament. Like, you need to be one of the best programs in the country. You need to be in the conversation. Like, that, I think, was more realistic. It's not like I'm saying that there were no expectations at all. But let's be real here. You lost 3 of your starting 5 from your national championship season. And let's just go through that 2022-2023 season. So you return Angel Reese and Flau'jae Johnson, your number 1 and number 3 leading scorers last season. Alexis Morris was your second leading scorer last year. She averaged 15.5 points a game. You lost her to the WNBA draft. LaDasia Williams, she averaged 10 points a game. You didn't have her this season. Jasmine Carson, Samaya Smith got hurt at the beginning of the season. You didn't have Samaya Smith's contributions this past season. Katari Poole, we all know what happened with this team in Katari Poole. So you lost a lot of your production from last year. You lost Alexis Morris, who in many ways was this team's leader. Even if she wasn't the most outwardly vocal leader, even if she wasn't the face of the program, Angel Reese was, Alexis Morris was very vocal about how she felt like she was the leader in the locker room. And you lost that. So I don't know how you can say that the way that this women's basketball season ended up was disappointing. When you got to the SEC tournament final and you lost to the eventual national champion South Carolina Gamecock team, and yeah, you lost to them in the regular season, FYI, so did everybody else. You make a run in the tournament and you beat good teams in the process. It wasn't just about the result. It was about the process as well. And the process wasn't always pretty. You had a lot of ups and downs, and it was rocky at times. But for the most part, you still found ways to win. And you still found ways to win on some of the biggest stages. Eventually, you just ran into the best player on the planet. Now, I'm disappointed in Kim Mulkey's game plan in that game. I'm disappointed in the management of Haley Van Lith this past season, because we were talking earlier in the podcast about putting players in their most natural positions in regards to LSU's defense and putting Sage Ryan at safety, Harold Perkins. What does this position at the inside linebacker position look like for him? Haley Van Lith was very obviously out of place all season long. Most notably, she was out of place when she was one-on-one against Caitlin Clark. So is the expectation for this team and for this program with a coach like Kim Mulkey to get past the Elite Eight? I would say overall, as a whole, yes. But if you really look at this team, what they lost, and how it ended up, not just losing in the Elite Eight, but losing to an Iowa team with the best player the sport has ever seen that ultimately went on to the national championship, no. I don't think that you can say that this season was disappointing. What was disappointing for me was Hailey Van Lith, whether that's her or whether that was Kim Mulkey's usage of her. That was a disappointment. This season, it wasn't. Because I expect LSU to be right back there next season. And I know you're losing Angel Reese. I get that. I understand that. But I expect LSU to be right back in the conversation. Because when Kim Mulkey's your coach, that is the fair expectation. So I wouldn't be disappointed. Upset, wanting more, wishing that they would have had a different game plan against Iowa, thinking that you could have, made it more of a game if you met South Carolina in the national championship game. Like, yes, I get it. All of that is totally fair. But to say that you're disappointed or, that this was a year of shortcomings, I can't totally get on board with that. Context. Add context. It's not just about the result. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU, we got a spring game on Saturday, and it is going to be a who's who of recruits that is in Death Valley for the spring game. Who is it going to be? Who to keep an eye on? Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider, will join us on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.